1. This past October, I got the lucky chance to finally work at a haunted house. It's been my dream job since a really young age, and a friend of mine hooked me up with the gig. Maddie had worked at this haunted house the previous year and told me how fun and thrilling it was. I agreed to work with her, and the job was overall amazing. I played Regan from The Exorcist, and my fellow co-workers said I was one of the best acts in the attraction. My bosses were also pretty proud and even posted a video of me on their Facebook. The job was just a pure delight, except for one of the workers. Besides getting home around 1 in the morning and losing my voice due to constantly screaming, this creepy co-worker almost soured the whole experience for me. Daniel was, I'd say, in his mid-40s. He worked in the haunted house as a butcher. He was a tall and brawny guy, definitely far more intimidating than my other co-workers, who were teenagers. I was 17, so was Maddie. He's bald and talks with a small stutter. Any conversation he carried, he was just visibly awkward. I'm not just saying that in a judging manner, it was just visible that something was a bit off about this guy. Daniel first started to talk to me after my first shift. He was complimenting my performance and how loud I could scream, which I didn't find odd at all. All the other workers were complimenting me as well, so him mentioning it was not out of the ordinary. We exchanged names, shook hands, and that was the end of that shift. Every shift that followed the first, Daniel would always compliment me, shake my hand, and ask me for my name again even though I already told him 5 times. Then his creepiness only increases. One night while all the workers were lining up to clock out and leave, Daniel goes on a huge rant to Maddie and me about his personal life. He mentions how much he hates his ex-wife, and would love to beat her up because of how she abused him. Daniel also said he is divorcing his current wife, whom he says that he still loves. I was just baffled that he, out of the blue, decided to rant about personal issues to 2 teenagers. But I brushed it off, clocked out, and Maddie and I drove home. On the ride home, I told Maddie how odd Daniel is, and she agreed, but argued that he's nice. So keep in mind that Maddie knew I was not particularly fond of Daniel and wanted nothing to do with him. A few shifts later, the worst incident involving Daniel occurred. The haunted house was closed and all the workers were scrubbing off their grotesque and changing back into their normal clothes. I was in the break room washing off my makeup with about 6 other people in the room, including Maddie and Daniel. Out of nowhere, Daniel just blurts out, "Man, my ride just cancelled on me." I could obviously tell this was one of those statements where he is fishing for attention. I kept my trap shut and continued washing off nasty makeup. Maddie, being an overly generous and somewhat airheaded teen, quickly offers to give him a ride. The moment those words fell out of her mouth, my heart sunk into the pit of my stomach. Maddie was also taking me home that night, since we alternated who drove to work. My eyes quickly shifted to Maddie, who somehow didn't see the strangeness in 2 teenagers giving a 45-year-old man a ride home at midnight. Daniel happily said, "Thank you so much," and detailed where he lives. Knowing I couldn't just blurt out no in front of Daniel, I gave Maddie a stern look and I leave the room. Bewildered, I walk out of the room to change out of my sweat-stained dress and into my normal clothes with the notion that I am about to endure a terribly awkward and scary car ride with a freak. I was livid at Maddie. She knew that Daniel frightened me and never thought to think before she blurted out her offer. I stayed back in the dressing room, too scared to hop in the car with Daniel. But I know I can't stay there forever. So I build up some courage and return to the break room where Maddie is. Daniel is no longer in the room, but Maddie is, as well as a few other workers. She informs me that another worker, a very sweet woman who is about Daniel's age, is going to take Daniel home instead of us. A huge wave of relief washes over me. On our way home, I ask Maddie why the plans changed. What she said further corrected my suspicions. While I was changing out of my exorcist costume, our boss Joey pulled Maddie into his office to say that she shouldn't take Daniel home. He elaborates how Daniel is bipolar and can get angry easily, and it's not safe for 2 teenage girls to be alone with him in the middle of the night. That's when the older woman offered to take Daniel home. This incident infuriates me in 2 ways. 1, why would a grown man think it's okay for 2 teenage girls to take him home? And 2, how could Maddie be so blind and lack vital common sense to know this is not a good idea. Thankfully, the moment passed, but there's still one more incident that remains. Ever since the last scenario, Daniel stopped talking to me. If I had to guess, Joey probably told him to stop. About the second to last night working at the haunted house, Daniel got hurt. While everyone is getting ready and putting makeup on, Daniel enters the break room with a gnarly gash on the top of his head that is spurting out pools of blood. We all thought it was really good makeup at first, but Daniel claims that he was messing with a garage door inside the attraction and it fell down on his head. For such a deep cut that was bleeding profusely, Daniel seemed way too nonchalant about it and insisted he didn't need medical attention. He sat in the break room for a while with the wound just pouring blood while we all applied our makeup. A part of me feels like wounding himself was intentional, but I could be wrong. He just seemed way too chill about it. And that's that. It's not a horrifying encounter, but it was enough to really shake me anytime I saw him. Thankfully, the room I was positioned in was nowhere near him, so he was never in my room alone with me. Daniel, I really hope you don't work at the haunted house next year, but if you do, I hope you get your creepy vibe in check. 2. So this is a story of something that happened to me and some friends when I was in high school. I think I was in grade 10. Me and 3 friends were smoking behind a school. The school was about a 45-minute walk away from the neighborhood where we all lived. It was a small high school town in Ontario, Canada. It contained 2 large schools and a bunch of small medium-sized elementary and middle schools. It's common knowledge that with every small town, when you're young, that the main problem is that there is nothing to do within it except party and run around the streets acting like idiots. And that's what we did most of the time. But I went through a phase when I was 13 to 15, where I just went to parks and schools with friends and smoked and/or drank. This particular night was just to smoke. In the middle of our session, a car pulled around the back of this middle school we were smoking at. A man got out of the car and started walking towards us. It was dark enough and the car was far enough away that we couldn't make out faces. But as 14 and 15-year-old kids, we thought it was an adult coming to bust us for smoking. So naturally we ran away through a field, over a fence, up a small street, with a few houses and back onto the main road that would lead us home. This was the main road that ran in the middle of the entire town. As we were walking down this main road on the sidewalk, we passed by a convenience store on the right-hand side. This was at one point the only convenience store in the town that sold candy. Cheap, assorted 5-cent per piece candy. We used to always come to this store as younger kids to buy that candy, so we were very familiar with this part of town at this point in our lives. So we treaded along with confidence, not even thinking twice about the person that we just ran from. In our town, this was a normal occurrence. We were teenagers loitering, and someone was coming to tell us to go away, so we did. End of story. No. Just as we were walking to Daisy Mart, the name of the convenience store with the 5-cent candies, headlights from that car lit up and blinked at us from an alleyway in between a concrete wall and the convenience store. The ignition started and the car sped up towards us with considerable speed. So we ran out of its way. We looked back and realized it was the same car from the school. The car pulled out of the convenience store alley, but it turned the opposite direction of which we were walking. We thought it was just a creepy coincidence, but about 10 minutes later the same car drove past us, and from tinted windows we heard someone in the car say, "We're still coming for you." And it drove off past us, up the road and out of sight. We were a little freaked out at this point, so we hurried along. The main road we were on eventually turned into a pretty sizable bridge which loomed over a small river and pretty large forested area. On occasion in local news you'd hear about children getting lost in this forested area, so it wasn't small by any means. So we all agreed to head under the bridge and take refuge to throw the guys who were following us off our trail. So we hung out onto the bridge, probably for about 30 minutes, talking, smoking, and mildly shaken up, but pretty much laughing it off. This was creepy to us, but nothing to be alarmed about. As mentioned, we were kids in a small town. We were used to getting up to no good and having to run from authority. This was just another day. Our confidence was overinflated. We never got caught. We lived in an area with so many connecting streets and parks. Running and hiding after creating mischief was something that came second nature. We confidently head back up to the bridge and continue our walk home after the mentioned time. Now, to explain this bridge, it was a long bridge, 4 lanes, 2 going in either direction. No room for a car to stop and wait. No designated parking lanes. It was somewhat of a mini highway. The bridge is also steep. So the middle of the bridge, which was also the area with the footpath that led to the forest, was the lowest point. There was absolutely no way any car could park anywhere on or near this bridge to idle and wait for us to come from under the bridge. Not to mention that the car was nowhere in plain sight when we decided to go under it in the first place. But after 2 minutes of walking, the car came up from behind us, and a man from inside the car said to us, "You thought you could get away from us? We'll always find you." So the car took off again, but we decided to as well. Once we crossed the bridge, it led us back to our neighborhood. To stress the point once again, the neighborhood we lived in contained many connected streets and many sections of homes and parks. A pretty large suburban area. If you didn't know where you were going, you could probably get lost pretty easily. So we ran to the closest, biggest park, where no cars would be able to get into. One street was visible from the park, but since it was the middle of the night, if you were driving by the park, it would be hard to make out anyone in the park. So that's probably why when the same car that had been following us drove by the park, it didn't stop this time. So since this park was literally in the middle of the neighborhood, we wished each other good luck, and we all took off in different directions to our respective homes. We each only lived 2 minutes away at this point, so we all made it home safely. 3. So these incidents started out about 6 years ago, and went on for a couple years. I used to be really into the music scene, going to shows and festivals every chance I got. This often meant meeting random people whose names I would forget 5 seconds later, etc. As a result of being out in Atlanta nightlife so often, I got frequent friend requests on Facebook. A naive younger me blindly accepted them, assuming they were just people I had met at shows and was too drunk or distracted to remember. One day I got a message from someone named Eddie. His Facebook profile picture was of someone at least a decade older than me, with long scraggly hair. He looked harmless enough, just another show-going hippie I assumed. His message simply asked if I was the girl that danced a half-circle around him at the local show last night, and then twirled dreamily away, or something along those lines. This was back in 2012, so I don't remember exact words. I responded that I had no recollection of that, and upon further investigation, saw that he lived in an entirely different state, so it couldn't have been me. He said that I must have a doppelganger out there somewhere, and I left the conversation after that. Over the next few months, I'd get random notifications that he had messaged me, asking if I'd be at various shows in the southeast, etc. I mostly ignored the messages, but would very occasionally respond, shortly expressing interest in a band he had mentioned, just trying to be polite. Why younger me felt the need to be polite to everyone is beyond me. I have since learned that it's okay to not respond to persistent internet strangers. The messages became more and more frequent, so I just started to leave them unread. Again, why I didn't block him is beyond me. I guess I thought he was just harmless and lonely. Fast forward about a year, it's summer of 2013, and 2 of my best friends and I are caravanning to Wakarusa, a music festival that took place in Ozark, Kansas. It was about a 13-hour drive from Atlanta, but totally worth it. We went every year. An important note here is that it wasn't some small intimate festival. It hosted upwards of 40,000 people, and it was often hard to keep track of my friends, let alone find people I knew who came separately. So my friends and I are on a blanket in the middle of a huge crowd, watching widespread panic. It's nighttime, so the only lights are coming from the stage, random LED toys or glow sticks or whatever. Out of nowhere, someone beelines for our blanket, makes himself at home next to me without permission, and strikes up a conversation. My group of friends is generally warm and accepting, and it wasn't unusual to make random friends at a big hippie fest like this, so we thought nothing of it at first, probably just someone high on ecstasy and looking for company. It wasn't until he started referencing me in my Facebook personally that the alarm bell started going off. This was Eddie. I had honestly completely forgotten about him and his persistent messages, and in the darkness there was no way I could have recognized him. He was talking like I was an old friend and tried to follow us around all night. Once I subtly alerted the others about who he was, We made every excuse in the book to try to leave, go back to our campsite, call it a night. He was painfully insistent on following us back and continuing to hang out. Obviously, I didn't want him to know where I slept, so I tried to appease him by saying I was exhausted, but that we could try to meet up tomorrow. Again, dumb, I know. I was just doing anything I could to get away from him in the moment, and I had no intention of actually following through. He finally left us alone, and we walked a long roundabout way to our campsite, just in case he had watched or tried to follow at a distance. The next day I made an avid point to avoid the area where we ran into Eddie, and discussed meeting up. The festival venue was so huge I figured there was no way he'd find me again. I was beside a small stage in the back corner of the venue, hooping in the woods with my friends, when I noticed him out of the corner of my eye. He was standing beside a tree alone, watching me with a weird smile. It reminded me of a proud dad watching his young daughter play, but with way creepier and more sinister overtones. Still, he hadn't done or said anything explicitly creepy or threatening, but his presence was so unsettling that I grabbed my friends and we pretended we had forgotten about a set that was starting, so we ran out of the wooded stage area. I remember hoping he didn't notice I had seen him. The festival ended the next day, and I was relieved to not see him again. Fast forward about another year. At this point I barely used Facebook, and had all but forgotten about Eddie. My friend that I went to the festival with was visiting from out of town that night, and we were going to go get some drinks. He got to my house, and we were catching up, and the subject of the festival came up. We started talking about Eddie and how weird that whole situation was, but at this point it was less creepy and more of just a strange memory. I told him Eddie used to message me all the time, that I had stopped opening them years ago. Naturally, my friend wanted to look through the messages, so I obliged. We began to scroll through the messages, and I realized just how dire a mistake it may have been not to block him. He had started asking me what shows I was going to, what part of Atlanta I lived in, etc. Not taking the hint that I clearly had no interest in responding at that point. Then, as the months went by, he was sending me links to tickets he had bought for me to shows in Atlanta, and then links to tickets he had bought for us to go together. There was one message asking where he could pick me up for a show that was 2 hours away in Athens, and that he couldn't wait to see me again. The messages continued to go on, but at this point I was so creeped out I immediately blocked him, finally, and closed the computer wide-eyed. What the actual fuck? He sounded like he was carrying on an entire relationship with me without my consent. He never acknowledged the fact that I literally hadn't responded to or even seen a message from him in over a year. Shaken up, we decided to just go get a drink and stop thinking about this weirdo. We went to Edgewood, a popular bar district in my city, and walked to our favorite small bar to get a drink. As soon as we walked into the bar, my heart sinks into the pit of my stomach. To this day, this was the creepiest and most coincidental moment that has ever happened. I see Eddie sitting at the far end of the bar. His face lights up as soon as I walk in, and he motions me over. He says something along the lines of, "I can't believe it's you," and starts firing off questions about me, my life, what I've been up to, etc. At this point, the darkest feeling washes over me. I just feel unsafe and exposed. Why is he here? He doesn't even fucking live in Georgia. I quickly tell him I have to use the restroom, but then I'll be back at the bar for a drink. I grab my friend, equally in shock, and we speed walk around the corner to the bathrooms, and then past them. I will forever be grateful that the door to the patio area was just past the bathrooms, so we got a head start. We got outside, hopped the fence, and start running to my car. I glanced behind us, and Eddie somehow figured out in those 15 seconds that we left, even though you can't see the bathrooms from where he was sitting, and he is walking rapidly across the crosswalk in our direction, eyes on me. We book it to my car and get the hell out of Edgewood as quickly as we can. Shaken, I drive us around for about an hour before eventually going home to make sure we weren't being followed. As inconclusive as the whole thing was, that was the last time I ever saw Eddie. Often I wonder if this was just a string of coincidences or if it was more sinister. After all, he didn't even live in Georgia. Why was he at one of my favorite bars alone the night I happened to go through his old messages? Had he somehow gotten a hold of my location via Facebook? I made sure all my location services were off when I checked my phone. So to this day I have no idea how he ended up there, or what his intentions were. But regardless, Eddie, let's please not meet again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 353. Let's see, this should go up on Wednesday, so as you guys get this, I should hopefully have showed the people out my house that were doing the windows, and they'll have them all finished, and I'll be attempting to, very sleepily, because I won't get much rest, be cleaning up the mess they've made, putting up blinds and curtains and things on these new windows. Quite frankly, I don't really want it done, but I don't think there's much I can do to refuse it. Ah well. With that, I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.